The mark of the beast. Ilara usually found solace in the sheep's chorus, a familiar backdrop to the Oakhaven Hills, but today, the sound scraped at her composure, a shrill counterpoint to a rising anxiety. Sunlight, usually welcome, pressed down like a leaden weight, and the air clung to her skin, thick with the aroma of parched earth and dust motes that she'd ventured further afield than usual, lured by a vibrant patch of clover, almost to the whispering willows at the wood's edge, a place shunned by the elder villagers. There, she spotted it. Initially, she dismissed it as trickery, a bizarre depression playing with the light, but as she approached, the form resolved itself, undeniably real. A footprint, vastly oversized, indented far deeper than any beast could manage. Even with prolonged effort, the surrounding soil was fractured and compacted, as if a being of colossal magnitude had borne down with terrifying force. Its mere dimensions stole her breath. Ilara recognized the marks of bears, wolves, even the rare mountain cats. This eclipsed them all, and that single-toed that was the truly unsettling element. A solitary, gigantic digit. A stifled gasp burst from her. Forget the flock, forget the clover, she whirled, her pulse a frantic drum against her ribs, and fled. She didn't cease her headlong flight until she stumbled into the village square, breathless and incoherent. A giant, a footprint in the west field. Her pronouncements were met with a spectrum of amusement and concern. Old man Hemlock, as always, occupied his bench, carving wood. He chuckled. A giant, is it, Ilara? Dipped too deeply into your grandfather's elderberry wine, have you? Marta, the village healer, however, hurried to Ilara's side, her brow creased with worry. Easy, child, regain your composure. What did you witness? Ilara, still panting, recounted her experience, her voice strengthening with each iteration. Attracted by the commotion, several villagers began to murmur amongst themselves. Bram, the blacksmith, a man of unwavering fortitude, leaned in, his eyes tight with apprehension. A giant footprint, lead the way. And so, a small contingent, guided by Ilara, proceeded back to the western field. The sheep, abandoned and bewildered, dotted the slope. The air grew heavy with foreboding as they neared their destination. Even Hemlock quieted, his carving knife still in his grasp. Upon reaching the spot, a wave of exclamations swept through the group. The footprint was undeniable, colossal and solitary, a monstrous gouge in the land. Heavens above, Bram murmured, circling the impression, his rough hand tracing its perimeter. What incarnation is this? The villagers buzzed with conjecture. Some, like Hemlock, remained dubious, attributing it to some freakish geological event or an intricate prank. Others, particularly the younger ones, were consumed by a blend of dread and morbid fascination. Anya, a young woman renowned for her imaginative tales, whispered, "It's a sign of the beast, the one from the ancient stories." Her words lingered, a chilling echo of the ancestral legends, narratives of monstrous entities that stalked the earth before Oakhaven's founding, beings of immense strength and unimaginable cruelty. Marta knelt beside the footprint, meticulously examining the disturbed earth. Whatever created this, she stated, her voice low and grave, is not of this world, and it is recent. A chill snaked down Ilara's spine. The sinking sun painted long, distorted shadows across the field, transforming the monstrous footprint into a cavernous maw, a silent menace looming over Oakhaven. The lost sheep's bleating echoed as a plaintive wail in the approaching darkness. A shared fear, denser than the encroaching night, settled over the village. Whispers of the past. Ilara found Bram hunched over a cluttered workbench in his workshop, the air thick with the scent of dried herbs and beeswax. Light filtered dimly through a grimy window, illuminating motes of dust dancing around his head like tiny, frantic spirits. He was meticulously carving a small wooden bird, his gnarled hands moving with a surprising delicacy. Elder Bram, she began, her voice hushed with a mix of respect and apprehension. He didn't look up. I heard the commotion, he rasped, never pausing. In his carving, Cyclops tracks, you say, children playing pranks, most likely. Ilara persisted. They were, large, Bram, and unlike anything I've ever seen. The fear, it's palpable. She gestured towards the village square, a place usually buzzing with activity, now eerily quiet. He sighed, a sound like wind rustling through dead leaves. The old stories, they are just that, child stories to frighten naughty children. He finally looked up, his eyes, usually bright and sharp, clouded with a weariness that seemed to age him further. But, come. He led her through a narrow doorway into a small, musty library, ancient tomes, bound in cracked leather and secured with tarnished metal clasps, lined the shelves. Bram ran a trembling hand across the spines, as if searching for a lost memory. He finally stopped at a particularly thick volume, its pages yellowed and brittle. He carefully opened the book, the scent of aged parchment filling the air. He pointed to a crude illustration depicting a towering figure with a single eye, wielding a club. Beneath it, in faded ink, were words Alara couldn't decipher, but which Bram read aloud in a low, mournful voice. The one-eyed behemoth, harbinger of destruction, sleeps beneath the mountain's heart. Awaken him, and Oakhaven will be no more. He slammed the book shut, his face pale. Legend. That's all it is. A cautionary tale woven by frightened ancestors. But the tremor in his voice betrayed his words. That evening, a hushed crowd gathered in the village square. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows, amplifying the sense of unease. Bram, reluctantly, addressed them. He spoke of the history of Oakhaven, of the generations who had lived and died in peace, of the importance of logic and reason, but when pressed about the Cyclops, he faltered. He recounted the legend, downplaying its veracity but unable to entirely dismiss it. The effect was immediate. Fear, previously simmering beneath the surface, boiled over. Accusations flew. Some called for the mountain to be fortified, others demanded a preemptive strike against the supposed Cyclops lair, wherever that might be. Still others, driven by a primal terror, wanted to abandon Oakhaven altogether. A burly farmer, his face flushed with panic, shouted, "Bram knew, he knew all along and kept it from us. He's protecting it." The accusation hung in the air, thick and heavy. Bram, his face etched with despair, could only shake his head. The weight of Oakhaven's history, and its future, crushing him. The whispers of the past had become a roaring torrent, threatening to sweep away everything he held dear. He had always strived to be the calm voice of reason, the steady hand guiding his people. Now, he stood helpless as they descended into chaos, their fear a self-fulfilling prophecy. He was no longer Elder Bram, the wise counselor, but just an old man, burdened by secrets he could no longer contain. A call to action. Alara's voice trembled only slightly as she addressed the knot of villagers huddled in the square. The midday sun beat down, baking the dust into the parched earth and reflecting the anxiety etched on their faces. "We can't just wait," she said, her gaze sweeping across familiar faces. Old Martha, clutching her rosary, young Finn, his eyes wide with fear, and Bram's parents, their faces creased with worry. "The tracks, they prove something is out there, something big. We need to know what it is, where it's going, and if it poses a threat." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mixture of apprehension and reluctant agreement. Fear was a tangible thing, a heavy blanket stifling any hope. "I propose a scouting party," Alara continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Someone needs to follow the tracks, assess the danger, and bring back information. I'm willing to go." A stunned silence followed. Then, Torvin, his broad frame casting a long shadow, stepped forward. "Count me in, Alara. Best to have someone who knows the woods." He grinned, a flash of white teeth against his sun-weathered face. "Besides, things are getting dull around here. A bit of excitement wouldn't hurt." Lyra, ever practical, pushed her way to the front. "I'll go too. Someone needs to keep you two from getting lost, or getting yourselves killed. Why knowledge of herbs could be useful, and I'm a dab hand with a sling." She adjusted the worn leather strap across her shoulder, her eyes glinting with determination. Alara felt a surge of gratitude. Torvin's strength and knowledge of the wilderness, Lyra's sharp wit and resourcefulness, they were invaluable, but her gaze drifted towards Bram, who stood at the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of stubbornness and fear. "Bram?" she asked, her voice softer now. "We could really use your tracking skills." He shifted uncomfortably, kicking at a loose pebble. I don't know, Alara. It's dangerous. Maybe we should just send a messenger to the king, let the soldiers handle it." Torvin chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "King's soldiers, they'd be here by winter, if we're lucky. By then, whatever made those tracks could be halfway to the capital." Lyra snorted. "Besides, Bram, you're the best tracker in the village. You practically grew up in those woods, you know the trails, the animal signs, everything." Bram remained unconvinced. He chewed his lip, his eyes darting nervously towards the forest edge. The air hung thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, usually comforting, but now laced with a sinister undertone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he sighed, a sound of weary resignation. "Fine," he mumbled, avoiding Ilara's gaze. "But I'm not promising anything, and if I see anything monstrous, I'm turning around." Ilara felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was enough. "Thank you, Bram." She turned to the villagers, her voice ringing with renewed resolve. "We'll leave at dawn, gather what supplies you can spare. We'll be back as soon as we have answers." The fear in their eyes didn't disappear, but a flicker of hope ignited, fueled by Ilara's audacity and the promise of action, following the trail. The gates of Oakhaven groaned open, releasing the scouting party into the pre-dawn chill. Bram led the way, his jaw set, the morning mist clinging to his dark beard like cobwebs. Behind him, Lyra checked the strap of her bow, her expression unreadable. Torvin, ever a silent mountain, brought up the rear, his hand resting on the head of his warhammer. The Cyclops trail was easy enough to follow at first. A swath of broken branches and crushed undergrowth leading away from the ravaged fields. The air still reeked faintly of something acrid, like burnt pine and wet dog. Bram pressed on, ignoring the protesting creaks of his leather armor. "Faster," he urged, not turning. "The longer we wait, the farther it gets." Lyra quickened her pace, her boots sinking into the soft earth. "Perhaps faster isn't the most prudent approach, Bram. Rushing in blindly is how people get killed." Bram stopped abruptly, whirling around. "And waiting around for the Cyclops to come back and finish the job is prudent. We need to find it, track it to its lair, and deal with it before it can hurt anyone else." "Deal with it?" Lyra echoed, her voice sharp. "As in, kill it. Have you considered any other options? Perhaps it was simply lost, driven here by hunger." Bram scoffed. "A one-eyed giant doesn't get lost, Lyra. It destroys, and if it was hungry, it could have hunted deer, not raided our farms." Torvin grunted, his voice a low rumble. "Arguments waste time. Cyclops tracks lead that way." He pointed with his hammer towards a dense thicket of thorns. The thicket proved difficult. Thorns tore at their clothes, snagged their hair, and drew beads of blood. Bram cursed under his breath as he wrestled his way through, his impatience growing with each snag. Lyra, however, moved with a quiet grace, carefully parting the branches and avoiding the worst of the barbs. Torvin, as always, was a force of nature. With a roar, he simply snapped and tore at the vegetation, creating a path wide enough for the others to pass through. Beyond the thicket, the terrain changed. They found themselves on a rocky slope, the trail now marked by dislodged boulders and gouges in the stone. The scent of Cyclops, stronger now, mingled with the sharp, metallic tang of iron ore. Lyra pointed to a fresh pile of droppings, enormous and foul-smelling. "It's close," she said, her voice tight. "We need to be cautious." Bram, however, was already forging ahead, his hand on the hilt of his sword. "Cautious is for cowards," he muttered. "I'm ending this today." Lyra watched him go, her brow furrowed with concern. The gap between them widened with every step, a silent chasm built on differing philosophies and a growing unease. Torvin remained at her side, his gaze fixed on the path ahead, a grim promise in his eyes. The desecrated shrine. The stench hit them before they even saw it, a cloying mix of burnt pine, upturned earth, and something vaguely metallic that made Ilara's stomach churn. Kalen, leading the scouting party with his usual grim determination, stopped at the edge of what had once been a sacred grove. Now, it was a wasteland. "Gods above," muttered Finn, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his sword. What happened here? The shrine itself, dedicated to the forest spirit Sylvani, was a shattered mockery of its former self. The ancient oak that had formed its heart lay toppled, its thick trunk blackened and split. The stone altar, once adorned with offerings of flowers and herbs, was overturned, its surface scarred with deep gouges. Scattered around were the remnants of the wooden fence, splintered and strewn about like discarded toys. Ilara, a scholar more comfortable with scrolls than swords, cautiously approached the fallen oak. She ran a gloved hand over the charred bark, feeling the lingering heat. "Fire," she stated, her voice barely a whisper. "A deliberate fire, and not recent, days old, perhaps a week." Kalen, ever pragmatic, surveyed the surrounding area. Look at the ground, he commanded, pointing to the churned earth. This wasn't just about destroying the shrine, this was about clearing land. The others followed his gaze. The forest floor, once carpeted with moss and ferns, was now a barren expanse of dirt. The trees that had formed the grove's protective barrier were gone, leaving only jagged stumps and raw earth. It was as if a giant plow had ripped through the heart of the forest. Farmland, Finn said, the realization dawning on him. They destroyed a sacred grove to make more farmland. A wave of anger washed over Ilara. The desecration of the shrine was bad enough, but the casual destruction of ancient woodland for something as mundane as crops was almost unbearable. Who would do such a thing? She asked, her voice trembling. Kalen's jaw tightened. Oakhaven, he said, the name laced with bitterness. They've been expanding their territory for years, pushing further and further into the forest. I warned the council this would happen. He kicked at a loose stone, sending it skittering across the barren ground. They're driven by greed, by a relentless hunger for more land, more resources. They don't care about the old ways, about the balance of nature. A low growl rumbled in the chest of Torvin, the quiet woodsman of the group. He knelt down, examining a patch of mud. Cyclops tracks, he said, his voice heavy. Big one. And other tracks, smaller, many of them, villagers, maybe, or slaves. The pieces were falling into place, forming a grim picture. The Cyclops hadn't just wandered into the area. It had been brought here, likely by the villagers of Oakhaven, to clear the land with its brute strength. The desecration of the shrine wasn't just an act of mindless destruction, it was a calculated move, a sacrifice made in the name of expansion. The metallic scent intensified, pulling Ilara from her thoughts. She followed the odor to a small, shattered idol lying half buried in the dirt. Picking it up, she saw it was made of tarnished bronze. A tiny, stylized image of Sylvani, the forest spirit. The head had been deliberately crushed. A vision flashed through her mind, thick-necked men with crude tools, felling the trees, their laughter echoing through the sacred grove. The Cyclops, a lumbering giant, tearing down the ancient oak, its roars of effort shattering the peaceful silence. The villagers, urging it on, their faces flushed with greed and triumph. She closed her eyes, the image burning itself into her memory. This. A plea for peace. We offer them another grove, Torvin said, his voice a low rumble that somehow managed to soothe the anxiety crackling in the air. The flickering firelight danced across his weathered face, highlighting the sincerity etched into every line. There's one just south of the Whispering Woods, ripe for the taking. Let them have it, and maybe, just maybe, they'll leave us be. Bram exploded. He shot to his feet, scattering pebbles from where he'd been squatting. Are you mad? Give them another grove. That's rewarding their aggression, encouraging them to take more. We'll be offering up our homes next. His hands clenched into fists, the knuckles bone-white in the dim light. The air thrummed with his barely suppressed rage. He spat on the ground near Torvin's feet. Coward. Torvin didn't flinch. He merely raised a hand, a gesture that spoke volumes of patience, even weariness. It's not cowardice, Bram. It's pragmatism. We're outnumbered, outmatched. A war with a Cyclops is a war we cannot win, not now. Lyra, who had been silently observing the exchange, pushed herself up from the log where she sat sharpening her hunting knife. The metallic rasp of the blade against the whetstone cut through the tension. Torvin's right that we can't fight them head-on, but we don't have to give them anything, either. All eyes turned to her. Bram, still simmering, grudgingly lowered himself back to the ground. And what brilliant plan have you conjured up, little huntress? He sneered, the sarcasm dripping from his voice. Lyra ignored the jab. We create a diversion, something big, something loud, something that will draw them away from the village, give us time to reinforce the defenses, maybe even find a way to permanently deter them. She pointed to the west, towards the jagged peaks of the Dragon's Teeth Mountains. There's a sulfur vent near the summit. It's unstable. A controlled explosion could create a rockslide, blocking the southern pass. They won't be able to easily reach the village then. The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. Bram was the first to break it. Explosion, rockslide, you want to trigger a mountain collapse, you'll bury the entire valley. Not if it's done right, Lyra countered, her voice calm but firm. We use just enough powder to trigger the slide, but not enough to bring down the whole mountain. It's risky, I admit, but it's better than sitting here waiting to be crushed. She met Bram's gaze directly, her eyes unwavering. Are you in, or are you going to keep arguing for a surrender you won't even admit you want? The fire crackled, spitting embers into the night, the smell of pine needles and wood smoke hung heavy in the air. Bram looked from Lyra to Torvin, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. The unspoken question hung in the air: whose leadership would they follow, the veteran warrior, advocating for peace, or the young huntress, gambling on a daring, dangerous plan? He knew the answer, deep down. Lyra's audacity, her willingness to risk everything, had already begun to sway the others. The shift in allegiance was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A line had been drawn in the dirt, dividing the group between those who clung to the familiar, and those who dared to embrace the unknown. He tasted ash in his mouth, the bitter taste of defeat, betrayal and confrontation. The air felt stagnant, thick with earthy moisture and the sharp, coppery taste of anxiety. Lyra's grip tightened on her roughly made torch, its unsteady light mirroring the frantic drumming in her chest. Now, she urged, nodding towards the densely tangled undergrowth where Bram was meant to have sparked the diversion. Only the whisper of leaves answered, underscored by the Cyclops' distant, bestial grunts. Bram, what's the hold-up? Torvin grumbled, his feet shuffling a nervous tattoo against the forest floor. His gaze flicked repeatedly towards the gargantuan print they discovered earlier, a landscape of worry etched onto his features. Lyra spun on Bram, her voice a low, furious rasp. The signal, we need that distraction, instantly. He stood paralyzed, his face a stark white mask in the fading light, the flint and tinder clutched in a useless fist. I can't do it, he choked, his eyes darting away from Lyra's. It's too much. What if it spreads? What if we attract something worse? Lyra felt her carefully constructed strategy collapsing around her. You agreed to this. It was the only way to buy Ilara time, she cried, her voice cracking with desperation. Torvin shouldered between them, his hand instinctively finding the comforting grip of his axe hilt. What's going on, Bram? Are you deliberately sabotaging our efforts? Bram's silence thundered like an accusation. It's lunacy, the whole thing, this expedition. It's a death sentence waiting to happen. I won't throw my life away for some fanciful quest. Fanciful quest? Lyra spat, her eyes blazing. We're trying to safeguard our home, shield our families, you craven dog. Craven, I'm being pragmatic. You're deluded by some idiotic hero complex. We need to retreat, before it all comes crashing down. Their argument echoed through the still woods, a discordant symphony of accusation and fear. The acrid scent of scorching leaves tickled their nostrils, not from a signal fire, but from the smoldering ashes of their broken trust. Ilara observed the unraveling scene, a knot of icy dread tightening in her stomach. Bram's defection was a crushing setback, plunging their meticulous planning into utter disarray. Yet, amidst the clamor and accusations, a sliver of opportunity presented itself. The Cyclops, roused by the commotion, was now bearing down on their location, its single, enormous eye narrowed in frustrated curiosity. It loomed closer, close enough for her to feel the earth shudder beneath its immense weight, close enough to inhale the reek of its feral musk. The moment had arrived, her chance. Oblivious to the escalating dispute behind her, Ilara melted into the shadows with a dancer's grace. She had to act. And she had to act swiftly. The fate of her village, and perhaps their very survival, hung precariously on her next move. She tightened her fingers around the enchanted dagger concealed within her cloak, its chill a sharp counterpoint to the heat of the moment, and stepped out of the darkness, directly into the path of the behemoth. A bridge of understanding. The air hung thick with the scent of pine and crushed earth. Ilara stood at the precipice overlooking the ravaged grove, the Cyclops a mountain of grief in its center. She descended, not with the stealth she'd practiced for escape, but with slow, deliberate steps. Each crunch of gravel under her worn boots was a plea, a promise of peaceful intent. The Cyclops didn't react until she was mere yards away. Then, its massive head swung towards her, the single eye burning with a raw, animalistic pain that mirrored the desolation around them. Ilara stopped, raising her hands, palms open. I know what this grove meant to you, she said, her voice clear despite the trembling in her chest. This was your home. A low growl rumbled from the Cyclops' chest, a sound that vibrated through the very ground beneath her feet. She pressed on. My village. They acted out of fear. They saw your size, your strength, and assumed the worst. But I see the sorrow. Elara swallowed, the words catching in her throat. I see the loss. She reached into her satchel, carefully removing the painstakingly drawn map. She unfolded it, holding it out towards the Cyclops. There is another grove, deeper in the forest, untouched. It's richer, more sheltered. A place where new trees can flourish, where you could begin again. The Cyclops stared at the map, its great eyes shifting, focusing on the intricate lines and symbols. It was a gamble, offering a map a creature this size would find difficult to interpret, but she hoped it would recognize the familiar patterns of foliage and water sources. A heavy silence descended, the only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves untouched by the Cyclops's rage. Elara held her breath, her arms aching from holding the map aloft. Finally, the Cyclops lowered its head, its gaze fixed on her. The burning anger seemed to dim, replaced by something uncertain. It extended a hand, the size of a small boulder. Elara didn't flinch, she remained perfectly still as the Cyclops's massive fingers, calloused and scarred, gently took the map. It held the fragile paper with surprising delicacy, studying it with an intensity that belied its brutish appearance. Then, it spoke. The sound was guttural, broken, but undeniably words. New grove. Elara nodded, relief flooding through her, so potent it almost brought her to her knees. Yes, untouched, full of life. A place to rebuild. The Cyclops remained silent for another long moment, then, it slowly straightened, its single eye looking towards the distant, untouched forest. A sigh, a sound of profound weariness, escaped its lips. Truce, it rumbled, the word echoing through the ravaged grove. For the new grove. Elara lowered her arms, her muscles trembling. Truce, she echoed, her voice filled with a hope she hadn't dared to feel until this moment. We will leave you in peace to travel there, and we will work to ensure the new grove will be protected. The Cyclops turned and lumbered away, towards the deeper forest, a mountain of sorrow carrying a fragile map, a promise of a new beginning. Elara watched until it disappeared into the trees, the silence broken only by the whisper of the wind through the leaves, a lullaby for a wounded land. The immediate threat had passed, but the work of rebuilding trust, of ensuring lasting peace, had only just begun, replanting the future. The air still smelled of smoke, a bitter perfume clinging to the damp earth, but beneath the acrid tang, a fresher scent was emerging, the loamy promise of upturned soil. Villagers, their faces smudged with dirt and grief, worked side by side, carefully placing saplings into freshly dug holes. The silence of morning had shifted, replaced by the rhythmic thud of shovels and the quiet murmur of shared purpose. Old Maeve, her hands gnarled like the roots they were planting, hummed a tuneless melody as she packed earth around a young rowan. This one's for resilience, she muttered, more to the tree than anyone else. Elara worked beside her, her own face etched with determination. Each sapling felt like a tiny spark of hope in the vast, charred landscape. A figure approached hesitantly. Bram. He stood at the edge of the replanting, his usual swagger gone, replaced by a visible unease. He shuffled his feet, kicking at a loose stone. Elara, he said, his voice rough. I was wrong, about everything, about the Cyclops, about everything. He swallowed hard. Can I help? Elara looked at him, her expression unreadable. The others paused, their shovels stilled, waiting. After a long moment, she nodded. Here, she said, handing him a small spade. There's plenty to do. Bram took the spade, his fingers tightening around the handle. He started digging, his movements awkward at first, then gaining confidence. He didn't speak, but his actions were a more eloquent apology than any words. Meanwhile, Oakhaven was a hive of activity. Elara had brokered a meeting between the village elders and the Cyclops. Surprisingly, had a name, Bor, towering over the assembled villagers. Listened patiently as they outlined their concerns. He spoke little, but his rumbling voice, translated by Elara, carried a weight of sincerity. Bor wishes to offer recompense for the damage caused by the incident, Elara explained. He understands the importance of the grove and wishes to help protect it. An alliance was forged. Bor, with his incredible strength, would help with the heavier tasks of rebuilding and protection. In return, the villagers would share their knowledge of the forest and provide Bor with, well, they were still figuring out what a Cyclops actually needed beyond a very large quantity of firewood. Elara was to be the liaison, traveling between the village and Bor's newly established dwelling further into the forest. It was a risky undertaking, but she felt a sense of responsibility, a feeling that she was building something truly important, something that transcended the petty squabbles and ingrained prejudices of the past. As dusk settled, casting long shadows across the revitalized grove, Elara stood on the edge of Oakhaven, looking out over the landscape. The air was crisper now, the smell of smoke fading, replaced by the earthy aroma of new life. Small lanterns flickered in the windows of the rebuilt homes, casting a warm glow that seemed to push back the darkness. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Elara felt a flicker of hope, a belief that even from the ashes of destruction, something beautiful could bloom. The scars would remain, a reminder of what had been lost, but also a testament to the resilience of the people of Oakhaven and their newfound alliance with the creature they had once feared.